I sat in on a closed-door investment summit last week. You know, the kind where the coffee is artisanal and the attendees manage billions. On stage was this distinguished keynote speaker, an Ivy League economist with a resume that reads like a history of modern finance.
Okay.
He was presenting a forecast for the next decade of AI in global markets, and the slide behind him, it showed a curve shooting upward at a nearly vertical angle, predicting productivity gains that would, well, effectively violate the laws of thermodynamics.
Right, the perfect hockey stick graph.
Exactly. It was a beautiful presentation. His voice was calm, his suit was bespoke, and his logic, it was internally flawless. He spoke of decoupling from physical constraints and infinite compute scaling.
Words that sound incredible in a conference room.
They really do. But then something strange happened. I looked around the room. These were some of the sharpest minds in the world math PhDs. Hedge fund titans, tech visionaries.
You'd expect some pushback.
I expected someone to raise a hand and ask about the power grid, or the capital costs, or just the simple reality of diminishing returns. I expected skepticism. Instead, what I saw was total mesmerized agreement. Heads were nodding in unison. They were taking notes furiously. The sheer elegance of the model had completely seduced them, making them blind to the fact that it was describing a world that, doesn't actually exist. That moment, watching a room full of geniuses agree on a physical impossibility, it was chilling. It wasn't ignorance. It was something far more dangerous.
It was intelligence that had severed its tether to reality.
That's it. It was the perfect illustration of a specific, terrifying phenomenon, high-capacity stupidity.
That phrase, high-capacity stupidity, I think it really captures a fundamental tension driving the world today. It's the tension between the beautiful abstraction, the models, the forecasts, the theories that tell us what should happen, and then the messy, unyielding reality of physics, resources, and human behavior that tells us what can happen.
You're watching the seduction of internal logic over external reality.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that anecdote is the perfect lens for this deep dive. Our mission today is to investigate how that tension between abstract ambition and empirical reality is fundamentally reshaping global power.
Right.
We are going to look at three major forces driving this shift, starting with a governing philosophy that explicitly rejects that kind of universal abstraction in favor of measurable, tangible reality.
Precisely. First, we will be analyzing China's unique, empirically driven economic stability model. This is a model that prioritized its specific national structure and realities over, conventional Western financial liberalization doctrines.
And in doing so, fostered massive resilience and secured its own strategic autonomy.
That's right.
Then second, we'll analyze the escalating global competition for critical AI infrastructure.
And this is where that theme of reality really bites. This competition is slamming headfirst into the physical limitations of compute power. It demands immense energy, water, and advanced chips.
It's a literal scramble for technological sovereignty where physics sets the pace, not software ambition.
Exactly. And finally, we will examine the urgent need for new international frameworks.
Because the old ones are creaking?
They are. We need systems that can accurately reflect a chaotic, multipolar global order, moving beyond these outdated 20th century governance structures to address borderless, shared planetary challenges that require, planetary thinking.
Let's start there, with the economic worldview that stands in direct opposition to those abstract universal models that, for decades, dictated global financial policy.
The Beijing Consensus, or the China model.
Right. This is a system that deliberately anchors its policies in concrete, verifiable success rather than some kind of theoretical perfection.
That's the core difference. The term Beijing Consensus was established back in 2004 by Joshua Cooper Ramo.
And it wasn't just descriptive, was it?
No, not at all. It was framed specifically to present China's approach not just as a successful path for China, but as a viable alternative development model, especially for the developing world.
It was a formal rejection of the Washington Consensus, which had been promoted by institutions like the IMF and the World Bank for so long.
A very formal rejection. And what's crucial here is the philosophical shift that Ramo encapsulated. The Washington Consensus was built on this belief in the universality of free market principles.
Rapid liberalization, deregulation, privatization, the whole package.
The whole playbook.
Yeah.
The Beijing Consensus, by contrast, legitimizes the notion of particularity.
Particularity, what does that mean in practice?
Well, particularity is a pretty radical concept in that context. It means rejecting the one-size-fits-all blueprint.
Okay.
It argues that nations must adapt their development strategies to their unique structural realities, their historical contexts, and their own domestic political systems.
So for a nation to prioritize its own financial and political sovereignty in its planning, that's what particularity dictates.
That's it exactly. The fundamental trade-off is moving away from a model that's optimized for, say, global efficiency, which demands uniformity and openness,
and moving toward a model optimized for national resilience and domestic stability.
which demands control and adaptation, yes.
So when you really break this approach down, what are the key pillars?
Well, scholars who dissect this approach, they repeatedly identify 4 key characteristics. The first is non-negotiable.
Which is?
Development must be paramount for promoting peace and stability. In this model, economic success isn't just a desirable outcome. It's the primary tool for maintaining social cohesion and political legitimacy.
And this commitment to stability, that must inform the next pillar, which is a preference for, well, slower change.
Incremental political and structural reform over sudden, chaotic changes.
Yes.
They avoid the economic shock therapy of rapid neoliberal change that we saw in many post-Soviet or Latin American transitions.
So the goal is always stability first, slow, measured adaptation second.
You're ensuring the system doesn't broke itself in the pursuit of some theoretical optimization.
Okay, what's the third characteristic?
The necessity of robust state capacity. This is not the minimalist, deregulatory state favored by classical liberalization doctrines.
This is a strong, highly competent, pro-development government structure.
Right. And it's seen as critical for executing these massive, multi-decade national development plans and, crucially, for effectively managing internal conflicts and ensuring wealth distribution actually reaches its targets.
So the state is the backbone of development, not just a referee.
It's the engine. And that leads to the 4th pillar, the steadfast preserving of sovereignty and independence.
Which makes sense. This ensures that internal stability, the foundation of the entire model, isn't undermined by external pressures or conditional foreign intervention or the whims of global financial markets.
Yeah, this strategic autonomy is the insurance policy for the particularity we just discussed.
So if we dig a little deeper, what are the actual methods? How does the system function on a day-to-day basis?
Well, looking deeper into the methodology, academics highlight several practical elements. There is this intensive focus on down-to-earth, pragmatic concerns.
Meaning things that people can actually see and feel.
Tangible improvements that serve the population, rather than just abstract physical targets. And this is paired with an ingrained commitment to constant trial and error experimentation.
That trial and error system, that adaptive methodology, that sounds like the intellectual engine of the whole Beijing Consensus.
It absolutely is. It favors gradual reforms, often tested regionally, over the rapid nationwide shifts associated with neoliberal shock therapy.
And it's not a closed system, right? It doesn't reject outside ideas entirely.
Not at all. But it uses what's called selective cultural borrowing. It integrates foreign concepts only when they have been adapted and proven to fit the domestic context. It refuses to adopt abstract blueprints simply because they look elegant on paper.
It's a very empirical approach.
Very. Rameau summarized this whole methodology through 3 development guidelines. The first is an unwavering commitment to innovation and constant experimentation.
Which is predicated on the belief that no perfect, one-size-fits-all solution exists anywhere in the world.
That's it. Success requires being dynamic, not fixed.
What's the second guideline?
It demands that progress be measured far beyond simple GDP per capita. This is critical.
So, not just about raw growth numbers.
No. It mandates that metrics must also include the long-term sustainability and resilience of the economic system, along with the equitable distribution of wealth. It shifts the entire focus from maximizing simple growth rates to building comprehensive, resilient national capacity.
And the third?
The third guideline emphasizes strategic self-determination. This encourages developing nations to assure financial sovereignty and directly link their geopolitics and their geoeconomics in national planning.
Which is a stark contrast to the Washington Consensus, which often demanded that economic policy be kind of decoupled from geopolitical or national security concerns.
A very stark contrast.
Okay, to see this whole philosophy in sharp relief, let's look at a case study. The 2008 global financial crisis, the GFC.
A perfect example. While global financial institutions were just cratering due to the toxicity of the U.S. subprime crisis, China's relative isolation from those direct financial losses was, well, it was largely secured by its policy of strict capital controls.
Those controls acted as a firewall.
A very strong firewall. The system was designed for resilience, not for maximum global integration, and that resilience paid off handsomely by limiting direct contagion from foreign financial turbulence.
But because China was already so deeply integrated into the global supply chain as a manufacturing power, the real economic shock still hit the real economy, and it hit hard.
Oh, it did. The economic growth rate, which had peaked at a blistering 13% in 2007, plummeted to 6.1% in the first quarter of 2009.
That's a steep fall. And it's proof that even a resilient model can't completely escape a global recession.
It can't. But the subsequent analysis of that slowdown is what truly demonstrates the empirical focus of the China model.
What do you mean?
What's really illuminating is identifying the exact source of the industrial slowdown. Conventional wisdom in the West often defaults to the collapse of the export market, since international trade froze up so dramatically.
And exports did fall.
They did, sequentially by over 20% in the first half of 2009. That's a massive blow.
But the data tells a much more detailed story, doesn't it?
It does. A deep study analyzing the decline in industrial value add between early 2008 and early 2009 found that the drop in exports only accounted for about 3.1 percentage points of the total decline.
Only 3.1. So what was the real driver?
The overwhelming driver of the decline was an internal crisis. The collapse of domestic demand, which accounted for a staggering 10.9 percentage points of that industrial slowdown.
So it was mostly an internal problem.
Primarily. This internal collapse was caused by massive inventory destocking by manufacturers. In response to this extreme uncertainty, they just cut their inventory levels dramatically, often far below normal operational levels.
Which effectively grinds internal production to a halt, regardless of what's happening with export orders.
Exactly. And that distinction, the shock being overwhelmingly domestic and confidence-driven rather than purely export-driven, that gave them the exact policy target.
And that clarity allowed for a targeted, massive, and rapid fiscal policy response.
Demonstrating that high-stake capacity that the model requires. In November 2008, the government announced the 4 trillion yuan stimulus package for 2009-2010.
The speed and scale of that response were, only possible because the central government had the fiscal strength and the administrative capacity to deploy resources almost instantly.
And look at the spending structure. It speaks volumes about the philosophical priority.
It's all about physical, tangible, long-term development, not financial engineering.
Absolutely. The largest share, 1,800 billion yuan, was dedicated to transportation network construction. Then you had significant funds for earthquake reconstruction, another 1,000 billion yuan, and rural infrastructure at 370 billion.
This was hard infrastructure investment, not financial bailouts for distressed banks or asset purchases.
And this approach was enabled by a really robust fiscal foundation. China's budget deficit to GDP was only 0.6% in 2008.
So they had massive maneuvering room for expansionary policy without immediately hitting debt limits.
Huge room. And the stimulus was enormously effective. It successfully achieved a strong and rapid rebound to 7.9% growth in the second quarter of 2009.
But the success wasn't just about the immediate economic boost, right? It was also about structural adjustment.
That was the long-term goal. To pivot growth reliance away from external demand and toward domestic consumption, a strategic goal that has remained central ever since.
How did the stimulus help with that?
Well, by strategically channeling massive investment into transportation and infrastructure in inland and rural areas, the policy aimed to fundamentally reshape the investment environment outside of the coastal export hubs.
So the improvement was designed to eventually enhance income and consumption levels in those regions, shifting the overall national balance.
That was the idea. And furthermore, the enhancement of social services spending on low-income housing, medical facilities, educational infrastructure, that was a key part of the demand-side strategy.
How so?
It was intended to reduce the pervasive need for what's called precocious savings among city dwellers.
Meaning, if people feel more secure about future healthcare and education costs, they're more willing to spend money today.
Exactly. It drives sustainable domestic demand. It's a comprehensive approach that integrates social planning directly into macroeconomic stabilization.
And this capacity for rapid, targeted, and structurally focused policy is maintained through that systematic policy experimentation we talked about.
The very engine of the empirical model.
The scale of this systematic learning is, it's truly unprecedented. Researchers have documented data on 633 distinct policy experiments conducted between 1980 and 2020.
It's this deliberate, structured approach that allows for continuous policy refinement and adaptation. You're essentially treating the national landscape as a living laboratory before a national rollout.
Which leads to a fascinating connection between political ambition and policy efficacy.
Right, the system employs a really powerful incentive structure. Participation in successful experiments is associated with a substantial 22.3% increase in the probability of promotion for local politicians.
So it directly links personal career success to demonstrated empirical success on the ground.
It's a potent link, but it also creates a complex secondary reality, what's known as the strategic effort problem.
Okay, what's that?
The incentive is so strong that local politicians allocate significantly more resources during the trial phase. We're talking nearly 5% more funds in relevant domains, specifically to ensure the experiment succeeds on their watch.
I see. So that intense, non-replicable strategic effort means the trial conditions aren't really representative of what a nationwide rollout would look like.
They're often not. The test policy looks better in the trial location than it might when it's implemented universally.
It biases the outcomes.
It does, because the central government isn't fully accounting for this positive selection and the influx of extra resources.
So while the system's core strength is this continuous trial and error refinement, which is highly empirical, the political necessity of linking results to promotion introduces a systematic bias.
Right. The final policy is optimized not just for efficacy, but for political reward during the localized trial phase.
It just shows that even the most empirically driven systems are still, at the end of the day, governed by human incentives.
It's a powerful illustration of the reality we opened with. The messy, complex reality of political economy governing even the most elegant policy design. It's a mechanism that fuels rapid adaptation, the one that requires continuous calibration to avoid systematic over-optimism.
Precisely. So we've established how this major global power successfully anchors its policy decisions to the reality of its internal structure and incentives. But what happens when that reality is suddenly disrupted by a technological tsunami? Let's shift our focus now to the hardest reality facing all global powers today: the unyielding physics of artificial intelligence.
And we transition from the macroeconomic reality of governance to the hard, physical reality of advanced technology. Artificial intelligence has not just emerged as a technological trend.
No, it's the central axis of geopolitical competition in the 21st century.
That's right. And here's where the tension between abstraction and reality becomes most acute. For years, AI was discussed in these abstract terms: algorithms, data sets, software.
But now it's recognized as the new oil, or maybe the new nuclear power, defining national influence.
Exactly. Control over the physical substrate of compute power is the critical lever determining future economic growth, national security, and global power distribution.
And this is driving intense techno-nationalism and deliberate selective decoupling.
The AI race is no longer a software race. It has fully devolved into a struggle for foundational physical resources, specialized hardware, and manufacturing capabilities. This is what we call the AI infrastructure arms race.
And the single biggest choke point is something incredibly small: semiconductors.
Yes. The sheer concentration of advanced semiconductor manufacturing is staggering, and it exposes critical vulnerabilities for any nation that's seeking autonomy.
Let's talk about the numbers.
Okay, consider this. Taiwan currently accounts for 92% of the world's sub-10 nanometer chip production.
92%. And why is sub-10 nanometers so critical?
Because that is the manufacturing node required for the most advanced, power-hungry components. Specifically, the specialized GPUs and accelerators needed to train massive foundational models, the core muscle of modern AI.
So that level of concentration means that nations fighting for technological sovereignty are using things like export controls and sanctions not just as trade tools, but as strategic weapons.
They are strategic weapons aimed at limiting adversaries' access to the physical components necessary for future dominance. And this has forced a fundamental shift, prioritizing supply chain resilience over the hyper-efficiency that defined globalization's past.
This geopolitical rivalry then compels enormous investment in domestic capabilities, whether it's through subsidies, national champions, or targeted research funding.
Right. The idea that a nation can rely indefinitely on a single, geographically concentrated source for its future military and economic power is now seen as the ultimate vulnerability.
But the constraints aren't just in the complexity of manufacturing. They are fundamental, tied directly to energy and resource scarcity.
This is where that abstract ambition of infinite compute scaling runs headfirst into the physical laws governing power and heat dissipation.
The computational requirements of AI are immense.
They are, and they create a massive inelastic demand for reliable, preferably low-carbon power and, of course, water for cooling. The data center consumption figures illustrate the scale of this problem beautifully, or terrifyingly.
Depending on your perspective.
Yes.
So what are the numbers?
Last year, U.S. data centers consumed about 176 terawatt-hours of electricity.
Which alone is comparable to the annual energy consumption of a small industrialized nation.
It is. But the projection is where the alarm bells really ring. That consumption could triple, reaching potentially 580 TWh by 2028.
To put that 580 TWh projection into scale, that is more than the current total annual electricity consumption of a country like the United Kingdom or Italy.
It is. And if that trend continues, data centers alone could consume nearly 9% of the entire U.S. national grid by 2035. Globally, data centers are projected to consume over 4% of worldwide electricity by 2035.
This isn't just an expense, it's a national resource allocation problem.
That makes reliable energy infrastructure the ultimate strategic asset. If you don't secure abundant, sustainable power, your ability to scale AI effectively hits an absolute physical wall.
The race for AI becomes fundamentally a race for electrons.
It does. And nations recognizing this reality are making enormous foundational investments. Consider the strategic planning in China. They're heavily investing in securing this energy advantage, with plans to build 150 new nuclear reactors by 2035.
150.
A substantial portion of this reliable, low-carbon baseload power is explicitly planned to support the energy-intensive future of AI infrastructure. It's a strategic move to ensure that energy constraints do not become the limiting factor in the technology race.
And the physical constraints extend further down the supply chain, right, into the raw materials needed to build the hardware.
All the way down. We're talking about critical minerals and the intricate processing networks necessary to make those semiconductors and advanced batteries function.
And here again, we see a heavy concentration.
We do. Currently, China is ranked the world leader in 37 of 44 critical technologies and processes, nearly 90% of the global rare earth supply.
And rare earth elements, they aren't necessarily rare in the ground, but their processing is the key.
The processing is complex, environmentally challenging, and heavily concentrated. And these materials are absolutely essential for high-tech products, from advanced computer hardware to fiber optics and specialized magnets.
So this means that control over the processing capability for these critical minerals grants substantial leverage in this digital Cold War.
It's a constant reminder that the digital future, those elegant AI models that appear to violate physics, is completely dependent on the very real, very physical supply chains of the Earth.
In response to these vulnerabilities, we're seeing national strategies hardening globally.
Definitely. The shift is forcing nations to consciously prioritize supply chain resilience and national security over pure economic efficiency, leading to widespread vertical integration and localization efforts aimed at building sovereign capacity.
And this hardening is clearly articulated in China's strategic direction, which is known as the dual circulation policy.
Right. This strategy works on two parallel reinforcing tracks.
Okay, what's the first track?
The first track aims to strengthen internal circulation by onshoring and consolidating supply chains in strategic industries. This is all about economic security.
Ensuring that critical materials, manufacturing, and technology infrastructure are domestically secured and insulated against external geopolitical pressure, the resilience part of the equation.
Exactly. Then the second track simultaneously promotes external circulation by opening up export markets and trade routes globally.
So by leveraging its vast economic influence, China is the top trading partner for over 120 countries, and platforms like the Belt and Road Initiative, it insulates its economy from potential outside pressures and secures its resource flows from diverse global sources.
That's the plan. The dual circulation strategy is a comprehensive response to the physical constraints and geopolitical vulnerabilities inherent in the AI race. It seeks to build self-sufficiency while maintaining global influence, a strategic balance designed for a world defined by techno-nationalism.
So the ultimate implication here is clear. AI leadership isn't just a race for the smartest algorithms.
No, it is a brutal, physically constrained scramble for the planet's finite resources. The advanced chips, the water for cooling, the immense supply of electrons, and the refined rare earth elements.
Making control over compute power the new definition of realized rather than abstract global power.
The sheer scale of that AI infrastructure challenge and the nationalistic responses it provokes, it highlights a global order in rapid, turbulent transition.
We are moving decisively away from the post-Cold War era of U.S.-led unipolarity toward what is now widely described as multipolarization.
Right. And multipolarity is characterized by an increasing number of major states and regional blocs vying for influence. Perhaps most prominently seen in the rapid expansion and consolidation of the BRICS nations, alongside the emergence of other regional powers.
And the transition isn't neat, is it? It's messy. It's characterized by elements of unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar realities all coexisting at the same time.
It is messy. And public perception of this shift is deeply, fundamentally polarized, which reflects the geopolitical tensions at play.
How so?
Well, surveys clearly indicate that majorities in Western industrialized nations often view this emerging multipolar order with anxiety. They fear it will inevitably lead to increased disorder, instability, and conflict.
They see a loss of centralized control.
Right. Conversely, majorities across BRICS countries and the Global South view the shift far more optimistically. For them, multipolarity represents a genuine path toward a fairer, more just, and more representative world order.
Which suggests a deep dissatisfaction with the structure that was established in the mid-20th century.
A very deep dissatisfaction. And that coexistence of polarities makes the current moment so complex. Unipolar elements persist, primarily due to the lasting scaffolding of the U.S.-led system.
The U.S. still accounts for almost 40% of nominal global defense spending.
And the U.S. dollar remains, for now, the dominant global reserve currency, holding about 57% of allocated reserves worldwide. This enduring financial and military gravity anchors one side of the system.
But the bipolar reality is equally undeniable. The core tension is driven by the formal assessment in Washington viewing China as, and this is a quote, the only competitor with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it.
And China's ongoing military buildup is historically significant, described as the most dramatic since World War II.
So that's the bipolar aspect.
Right. But simultaneously, the expanded BRICS grouping acts as a potent counterweight to the established Western structures.
After its recent expansion, the group now accounts for nearly half the world's population and controls more than a third of global GDP.
And that economic and demographic scale positions it explicitly to challenge the established norms of global financial and political governance. It gives voice to that desire for a fairer world.
Within this complex multipolar environment, China's geopolitical clout is substantial and growing, and it's fueled by its resilient economic model.
Absolutely. While its leadership consistently states that China does not seek to export its political system, they actively suggest that developing countries can learn from Chinese wisdom and solutions that have been proven successful in practice.
Things like high-speed infrastructure development and poverty alleviation strategies.
Things that are tangible. And China leverages its formidable economic power, projected to account for 21% of global economic growth in the next 5 years, and its extensive diplomatic platforms like the Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS grouping to rally nations that are discontented with the current global structure.
It offers an established alternative for developing nations that prioritize sovereignty, stability, and particularity over conditional financial liberalization.
It does. And this complex, volatile, and increasingly multipolar global environment exposes a deep structural weakness that we simply can no longer ignore.
Which is the inadequacy of 20th century governance structures.
Exactly. The United Nations, established in 1945, is trying to apply a structural logic centered entirely on the primacy of the sovereign nation state to fundamentally 21st century planetary problems.
And the critical issue is the nature of today's most urgent challenges.
Climate change, pandemics, sophisticated AI regulation, systemic supply chain disruptions. These issues are inherently systemic and borderless. They do not respect national boundaries, tariffs, or sovereign vetoes.
These systemic issues are so vast in their temporal and spatial dimensions spanning continents and generations that philosophers have termed them hyper-objects.
A great term for it. Think of global plastic pollution or the entire climate system. These are challenges that require a fundamentally different kind of human reasoning and cooperative action that transcends the traditional fixed boundaries of the nation-state.
And the structural failure of the UN becomes starkly visible when it's faced with these hyper-objects.
Its institutions are structurally incapable of tackling planetary problems at scale precisely because national sovereignty holds absolute primacy within its framework. Every decision, especially in the Security Council, is subject to the veto power and self-interest of sovereign nations.
Which leads to structural gridlock on issues that demand unified, immediate action.
It's like trying to run modern AI software in a 1940s mainframe. It just doesn't work.
So moving forward requires evolving frameworks that are specifically designed to foster cooperative governance models that are capable of addressing these borderless crises.
And this evolution requires both an intellectual shift in how we conceive the world and a profound psychological shift in how we relate to each other.
Let's start with the intellectual shift.
Intellectually, we must develop and embed new theoretical frameworks. Something like the concept of planetary boundaries, which scientifically acknowledge the physical limits and constraints of the Earth's system.
So it moves the global discussion away from purely ideological conflict and toward the shared empirical reality of planetary survival.
Right. We have to recognize the unyielding laws of physics that govern the habitability of our home.
And the psychological shift is even harder.
Much harder. A new narrative is needed, one that moves beyond this outdated zero-sum nationalism to acknowledge and integrate humanity's deep physical and technological interconnectedness.
The global system is a connected web, and damage to one part, whether it's a supply chain or an ecosystem, just ripples globally.
It does. And governance improvements, therefore, must involve a highly sophisticated nested approach. They have to look both up at planetary systems and global coordination.
And simultaneously down to resilient, empowered local structures, cities, and regional blocks that are integrated directly into the decision-making processes.
Exactly. The nation-state remains a component, but it can no longer be the sole sovereign locus of power in the face of these hyperobjects.
And this acknowledgement of the limitations of the nation-state model in the face of borderless reality, that represents the necessary next iteration of global governance, one designed for the highly complex, multipolar, and physically constrained world we now inhabit. So this deep dive has explored a global landscape defined by the relentless and often surprising return of reality.
It has. We observed how one major global power, China, achieve strategic stability, economic resilience, and immense national capacity by actively prioritizing empirical reality and adaptive policy.
A pragmatic, state-backed, stability-focused approach that favored structural adjustment and incrementalism over elegant, abstract liberalization doctrines.
They built a system rooted in what works, not what is theoretically perfect.
And then we saw the cutting edge of technological ambition, artificial intelligence, running directly into the constraints of physical reality.
The unyielding laws of physics that govern energy demand, the sheer fragility of concentrated semiconductor supply chains, and the absolute scarcity of critical materials required for computation.
This central tension persists. Global governance, designed for a simpler, less interconnected era, must urgently evolve to address borderless planetary crises.
And this must happen in a complex multipolar system where rising powers prioritize strategic autonomy and resource security. The elegant, abstract models of infinite growth and decoupled progress are meeting the hard limits of the planet's capacity.
The true test of future global leadership will be the capacity to incorporate the unyielding laws of physics and the granular realities of resource scarcity, the very realities ignored by the elegant, abstract models of the past, into strategic decision-making, ensuring that the increasing intelligence of technology is firmly tethered to the reality of the planet.